Welcome to This Heilkunst Life, a podcast where we help you to bring the powerful insights of Heilkunst medicine into the everyday reality of your life. I'm Jeff Corinter,
And I'm Allison McQuinn.
and the production of this show is supported by our inner circle. Join us in our ongoing conversations between each episode at our website, thisheilkunstlife.com, and click on Inner Circle in the upper right corner of the page. This is episode 3, The True Meaning of Your Shocks and Traumas, 32 short films about your sequential timeline. And Allison, I believe you've brought a story to open us up today.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell you about a client that I served about 17 years ago. And it was quite the moment, really, in her life and actually also mine as a young practitioner of Heilkunst medicine. It was a story about how she had grown up in Bosnia, in Yugoslavia, during the time where there was a lot of war, a lot of bombings. And as a child, she grew up in a high rise with her mother and her grandmother. And you can imagine it was extremely traumatic for her because she actually didn't know if the next day her family and herself would survive. And so there was a lot of trauma as a child. She had actually moved to Canada, which is where I was serving her. And she came to me because somebody had referred her to me because she had had something happen about 3, 4 months before. And that was a car accident. And it wasn't severe at all. It was just being hit from behind, and the bumpers barely touched. But there was a decided pop. And in that moment where she detected this slight movement forward in her car, but heard this pop, her whole physiology interpreted it as a bomb. And she went completely prone. And when they rescued her out of her car, they had to take her prone and flat on a board as if she had broken her spine. That's what they thought had happened. So the paramedics were extremely cautious with her, and they get her to the hospital and they do a full examination, and the doctors go, "There's nothing wrong with this woman. All of her tests have come back normal. She has not injured her spine or her neck." And so they really reduced her to a psychosomatic case, something that was all in her mind. And when she came to me, of course, yeah, I was able to actually validate her and let her know it was not all in her mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Allison. There's so many powerful points within that story, but particularly for what we're talking about today, it really brings home our central point, which is that our topic is on the sequential timeline, somebody's history of shocks and traumas, but it's anything but a mechanical fact about somebody's health history. It has this deep living content behind it. As I say, this case illustrates so powerfully. I like the way you really bring us into the moment and that feeling in that story. But yeah, this is our theme today. That we're going to be talking about in several examples, several kinds of ways of looking at this. But this process of taking a patient through their timeline is, as I said, is anything but mechanical. Now, I've seen examples of that. I've seen where people have actually, outside of graduates from our school, the Hahnemann College, they've just kind of picked up, the idea of doing timeline therapy, and I've inherited some of these patients from some of these, external practitioners who had this very mechanical approach. Now, I understand when a patient has a mechanical idea, and we work over time to give them a more living, dynamic idea of not only the timeline, but of what's going on in their health and the other things and all that. But when I see this in another practitioner, it's quite tragic because the practitioner should not be bringing more blockages into a case, but actually relieving them. So anyways, as I'm saying, Alison, I really appreciate that story for so many reasons, but for this main reason that, yeah, we are going to spend this episode really going beyond what could be seen as a mechanical exercise into anything but.
Yeah. And often patients too will just, once they understand that every 28 days approximately we meet to strip off the next layer on the timeline, the idea sometimes people will say, oh, why don't you just give me the remedies for the next year and, all for 12 next visits and we'll call it a day. And as you know, things, there are other issues that flare up with regards to a timeline that was potentially missed. That we do a lot of dialoguing around the occurrence that come up around, as we've talked in prior podcasts about things that occur as a result of clearing those events on the timeline. And you don't want to miss that opportunity to speak to those occurrences because they're hugely informative around therapeutic education and preventing future events from reinfecting of a similar nature.
Exactly. And also, sort of embedded in what you're saying there, even let's say there was such a thing as a perfectly prognosticating crystal ball, which could tell us as the practitioner exactly what remedies a patient would need for the next 12 months into the future. Let's say we're in Star Trek, future science fiction future here. We had some perfect technology like that. Even if there were such a thing, that would only handle the curative aspect of treating the timeline and not the healative aspect, which we're going to, that will become clear as we go through this episode. But as I said, even if we had that crystal ball and knew exactly which curative remedies the patient had coming up for the next 12 months of their life, as I said, I chuckle because, yeah, that's ridiculous that there could even be such a thing. If there was, as I said, that the whole healative process between the patient and the practitioner and all this deeper living content could not be predictable. As I say, even if such a crazy prediction machine would even exist. So as I say, we'll see what we mean there in more detail. But yeah, that's definitely going to be kind of a running thing. Keep that in the back of your mind. Yeah, we're getting way past this idea of a mechanical treatable timeline to a very dynamic living timeline. Any human being kind of instinctively understands this. As soon as anyone treats us mechanically, we get frustrated when we're on a 1-800 number with some service, bank service department or whatever it is, and we get frustrated because we just feel like we're being treated by a number and they're not listening to us. Well, of course, none of us likes that, but that's this same idea. We recognize and don't like when somebody's treating us mechanically rather than dynamically. So this is definitely, the kind of the bigger theme we're kind of going to work through here today.
Yeah. And for example, as I was going through my own timeline, I had an 1.5-inch tumor show up in my left breast. Well, that was related, so related, and that will happen. Things will come up to be released and to be dealt with. So yeah, the mechanical nature of the timeline is very dynamic. It's not mechanical at all.
Yes. And what you just said also, actually, about that tumor showing up, that harkens back to our last episode 2, where we talked really about getting into this deeper literacy, as I call it, of understanding what a symptom means, right? Because depending on the context and the direction things are going, and what are the overall factors going on, a symptom showing up can be a great thing, it could be a bad thing. But without the context, in the allopathic definition of health, I'm just recapping episode 2 a little bit here, but you get this idea, symptom equals bad, no symptom equals good, and you get this, you get even more of this mechanical kind of thinking applied to health, which can never work. It just, you can't get to an actual state of health through any sort of mechanical definition. So anyways, that's a great example for that reason and many more as well. So where I wanted to begin is, and Alison, chime in. Of course, you know this as well as I do. We studied all of this, the same source textbooks and all the rest of it. But the what I want to do is just kind of lay out an overview or a history of where this idea of sequential treatment came from. Okay, and what someone might think is that, okay, well, we have Hahnemann, back in the 18th century, in the 19th century, he kind of bridged the turn of the century there. We may think, yeah, there was Hahnemann, and he gave us homeopathy, and he gave us some basic remedies and everything. And now in modern times, probably someone came along and invented this idea of sequential treatment. But in fact, when you go right back into Hahnemann himself, you'll find the seeds of this idea of sequentiality. Now, he did not lay out a whole therapeutic protocol the way we do it now, but that doesn't matter. It was there in his thinking. It was there in his, the whole consciousness of Heilprin, starting with Hahnemann, and from his most basic principles. Once you understand his definition of disease, how a disease kind of impregnates into the whole human life force, that a person can actually have one or two or several diseases at the same time. And that's actually the very basis that what I'm saying, that Hahnemann's principles includes the idea of a timeline, because what he laid out for us was, let's say somebody does have that one simple disease, that mythological situation, and then a second disease comes along. Well, only a very small number of outcomes can happen, and one of the main ones is that new disease will basically suppress and or suspend that original disease, and it will kind of layer on top. So right there, right in that core Hahnemannian principle, you get this idea of layering, which already implies an idea of a sequence. Because then when treatment comes, you have to treat that disease, which is now on the outer layer on top. But and then by definition, once you clear that out, you've cured that disease. Now that original disease will raise its head again. So you already get this implication of sequence once you understand Hahnemann's definition of disease, and now diseases can be more than one at a time, and therefore layered in the way I just said. So it was right there in Hahnemann, right from the beginning. As I said, he didn't have a very formal protocol of what he called timeline therapy, but that's beside the point here. This concept of sequence and a layering of disease has to be right there in Hahnemann for it to make sense all the way through from him all the way to today. Like my point here being, there's no break in history, right? It's not, as I said, it's not that some newfangled homeopath came along in the 20th century and invented something new. I mean, they may have discovered a new way to apply this in a practical way, but there's a continuity of principle, and that's really the important point there.
Yeah, well said.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, that's Hahnemann. He kind of started us off in the late 1700s, the early 1800s. He gave us these foundational principles. And fast forward to, again, this fellow in the 20th century. I'll actually name one now, and that's a Swiss-French MD, physician named Dr. Jean Elmeguer, and he wrote a book. Well, in French, I'll give you the English translated title, but the French equivalent to our English title was off of Rediscovering Real Medicine. And I believe, this is going from the top of my memory, that was written in French in 1977. Might be a little bit off in the year, but it's approximately historically in the right place. And he was an MD, as I said, but he also practiced classical homeopathy. And he came up to something that all classical homeopaths face in one way or another sooner or later, which is something that they would call a blockage to cure. And all that means, in their terms, is, okay, I'm following my protocols. I'm diagnosing the patient. I'm getting, the information I need. I'm kind of figuring out what homeopathic medicine do they need. But this blockage to cure basically says that, well, even though homeopathy, on that basis, is supposed to work really well all of the time, sometimes it doesn't. So that's, that gets this little bit of a euphemism. It's called a blockage to cure. Well, that's just your way of saying, the remedy isn't working and you don't know why. What is that blockage? Well, this is what Dr. Elmeguer set out to discover, and he actually used kind of a modern measuring device called an EAV machine. That that's an acronym. It stands for electroacupuncture according to Voll. Voll is the name of a man who invented that device, and he basically used that to kind of discern, well, what, like in each given patient, what is this blockage? Why isn't the remedy working? What's kind of getting in the way here? And he kind of came to the understanding that he found one of any number of different kinds of basic shocks or traumas that the patient had had, which were forming this blockage to cure in their case. And as I say, he used this EAV machine to unearth what the blockage was, and then he would use the appropriate, at this point, now he would use the homeopathic remedy, not based on the patient's symptoms, but based on this discovered hidden blockage that the patient was fostering, and nobody could figure out what it was. The patient didn't, nobody, like, there was no formal timeline therapy at this point. He was just in this discovery process. So yeah, so they cleared the blockage, and then Dr. Elmiger was able to go back to the what the classical homeopathic remedy should have been in that case, and then it would work.
Mhm.
So anyway, so fascinating. Like here's a, this is the scientific method. This is scientific discovery. Which is always kind of doing something like this. We hit some kind of roadblock, some problem of our understanding or our practical abilities or whatever, and the scientific method wants to find a way through. Through it, you can't go over the mountain or under the mountain or around it or whatever. We have to find the path, whichever one that is, and that's what he did. He used the EAV machine. He found that it wasn't a symptom-based remedy that we were in anymore. It was now in the realm of a causation, a shock, a trauma, some major event that impacted on the patient's life force. And anyways, he found the practical clinical way to actually get to the bottom of what was going on there.
Yeah.
Mm. So as I say, I think that book was 1977, give or take. We're in the right ballpark. And he also, as I say, some of the group of shocks or traumas that he was learning through this EAV machine were actually some of the patient's original immunizations, right? So again, through the EAV machine, he identified what the blockage was, and then through the homeopathic remedy, he fully cleared that, out of the patient's system. And as I said a moment ago, and then he was able to get back to that original, what he considered the correct remedy at the beginning. It would actually work after he cleared this blockage out for them. So that was Dr. Elmiger. So he was kind of groundbreaking. He opened this new kind of clinical chapter for us, this new practical approach. And then in the early 90s came along our mentors, Rudy Verspoor and Patty Smith. And Rudy had actually read Dr. Elmiger's book in French, and there was no English translation available. So he and Patty actually wrote their own book, on his ideas and everything, and they were starting to apply this in their own clinic. So they were just kind of giving not quite a translation, but just kind of a further interpretation of what he was saying in his book. They were just kind of adding a little more to it, and of course giving this to the English-speaking world, because this was not only available in French up until then. So they did all of that. They brought this to the English-speaking world, but in their process of giving their interpretation of the book, they added another dimension, which was, as I said, Elmiger was giving all the physical blockages to cure, the physical shocks and traumas, but Rudy and Patty also added in now the dimension of emotional shocks and traumas.
Mm-hmm.
That was in their clinical practice. That was something that their experience taught them also needed to be strongly considered. So if you're a patient of ours, if you know that NSOL remedy, that's kind of the acronym for our 4 primary emotional shocks and traumas, grief, anger, fear, anxiety, guilt, like the whole spectrum of all these primary emotional shocks and traumas. They were starting to use these with this method that had been introduced by Elmiger. Is that he didn't have that consciousness around the emotional shock. And this is also, again, the nature of science. We just kind of get one dimension, one layer at a time, one researcher at a time. And this is where I always say that the process of science is really a communal activity. And that communal, of course, can be over the course of history, right? It may even be generations that have never met each other, but we can still think of this as a kind of a broad scientific community around a given a given area of discovery.
Well
So
said.
yeah, so there we go. We have Rudy and Patty. They're building on Elmiger, and then Rudy and his long-term research partner Stephen Decker. Now in the late 1990s, I almost said late 1900s. I guess that's true as well. The same mathematically, that's the same. They put out their grand research book called The Dynamic Legacy, and they did well, I'll use the word again, a really grand exposition of these deep principles that Hahnemann laid down, but really bringing them out to their fullness. So, the analogy we often use is Hahnemann laid out kind of like this grand architectural blueprint of a complete system of medicine. But he, in his lifetime, back to our community of scientists over the generations, he only had time to build to its fullness about one and a half of the rooms of that great building he drew a blueprint for. But then the generation since, and especially with Rudy and Stephen's work, they've really expanded that blueprint out and really put a lot of flesh and bones, onto this architectural drawing now. So we have, from Elmiger, but much more, going much beyond that. We have more and more of this really full kind of picture of what Hahnemann was really laying down. Right?
Mhm.
Because as I said, he had time to build about a room and a half, let's call it. But yeah, with the Dynamic Legacy, this book in the late '90s now, we get more of a philosophical and conceptual framework of what's really going on when we talk about something like Elmiger's sequential treatment. Right? We have Hahnemann's basic principles, as I mentioned. We have the practical part illuminated by Elmiger. But through this book, The Dynamic Legacy, we get much more of a conceptual grounding of all of that. We get this idea of a sequential treatment, or really any version of homeopathic treatment. We're really getting this middle jurisdiction of three grand therapeutic jurisdictions that were, as I said, they were there in Hahnemann's framework, but now we're starting to get a fully. Oh yes, that's right. And your diagram is kind of flaking in and out because of the background technology here. But
Mhm.
as we can get a little bit of a hint here, there are these three, all the bubbles you see there. Just think of it kind of vertically. We have the lower third, the middle third, and the top third. And in each one of those areas, we have originally Hahnemann laying down a kind of a conceptual or a framework of principles, but now more and more and more, we're getting both the philosophical and the practical ability to bring these to life. So as I say, Hahnemann laid the groundwork, but somebody had to, yeah, as I say, gave us like a bit of that first floor of the building, but the second floor a little bit. But yeah, now we're really starting to bring in a full building team, a full construction team, and this building is like going to be a full skyrise by the time we're done with it in the next handful of years or so. So, anyways, this is what their book Dynamic Legacy really started to bring, to take Elmiger's practical sequential therapy, Hahnemann's principles, but give us much more fullness to how all of that really works together. So, as I mentioned, Alison showed her diagram. We have the three jurisdictions. That's worth several hours of podcast right there. We'll probably touch on various points as we go through future episodes. But the other big distinction that they brought forward, as I say, it was there in Hahnemann, but needed more fleshing out. And that's this difference. I've sort of hinted at it with Elmiger, this difference between treating at the symptom level versus treating at the causation level, or the technical words they drew out of Hahnemann, the pathic versus the tonic, right? So we
Mhm.
have homeopathic, the symptom-based picture, the symptom picture approach, or the homotonic, which is really what gives us the principle to treat at this timeline level. So I don't want to go too much more into that. There's hours and hours of detail which we don't really need today. I just want to give you this idea of a history and a framework that was developing over these centuries and over these decades, where all of this kind of started to come out. But this will kind of give us the groundwork for the real meat and potatoes we want to get into today.
The most superficial example I give of that to patients typically is that, let's say a tennis player develops bursitis in their elbow. And if you go to a classical homeopath or an allopathic doctor, what they'll do is, of course, just prescribe on the basis of that pain and inflammation. The allopathic doctor will give anti-inflammatory. The classical homeopath may give one remedy, like rust tox, for example.
Yes.
And, 15% of the time it will work. But if it is actually anchored to a genetic miasm or the roots of chronic disease, it's not going to resolve it. And this is most of the time. It's 85% of the time that's true, that the chronic or tonic disease has not been mopped up or addressed. And the symptoms just come back, which is unfortunate because it gives a bad rap to homeopathy.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Those 15% where, it works brilliantly, yeah, does not really make up for that 85% that falls on its face. And nobody knows why. Now, as I say, until we get people like Elmager and solving the problem of blockages to cure, yeah, you have this 85% failure rate. I don't know which sounds worse or better, 15% success or 85% failure. But yeah, I don't like the odds on either side. So
No.
uh, yeah, so there we have it. So a little bit more of kind of giving us the framework of where we're going to go in this episode today. I want to talk briefly about the whole this whole idea of shocks or traumas and what's happening to a person when that's going into their cellular memory, or that's going into their life force. When that becomes part of their living dynamic expression of their health, right? And the basic thing I would say, and again, this could be a topic for one or several other episodes, I will just mention it so briefly here. The whole human physiology is what we call dynamic physiology, is really a four-folded physiology, right? We don't just have this one material body, that we can see, when we're talking to a person in front of us, and you can shake their hand and give them a hug and all these things, and we feed our body. The nutritious foods, we take in the mineral kind of physical content of the food and take that in as nutrition. That's one of four bodies. We have that physical body, but we also have an etheric body, which is another way of saying it. It's kind of our life body, right? It's kind of running all of our dynamic living functions, everything from cellular metabolism and respiration, and what happens to the food I just mentioned, and all of these things. There's kind of a dynamic like a life force or a living function that is really keeping all of our animated functions going, right? It's if you meditate on the question, what's the difference between a life form, something that's alive, and something that's kind of a static material object, like a rock or something. It's like, well, it's that etheric body or that life force which is behind that. The third body is what we call the astral body, and that, in the case of humans and animals, that's the body which really gives us that inner life, you know, feelings and sensations and kind of inner, you can say if we have an inner map of our environment, we have desires and instincts and wants and needs and all the rest of it. Well, that we kind of map out onto the world. Oh, I want to climb that tree and get a coconut because I'm hungry, or like all these kind of human slash animal thoughts. Those are all kind of being run in that astral body. You can, as I say, you can call out that inner consciousness. And if you want to know, start to know what is the distinction between a creature that has an astral body and one that doesn't. Well, meditate on the difference between what are the capacities of an animal versus a plant, right? I'll just name a couple, just to kind of kick that off, but you can take that as homework. The animal has locomotion. They typically have four legs. They walk from place to place. They're a fish. They swim from place to place. Where the plant doesn't. The plant is literally planted in a place, and it doesn't get up and walk around. So that's one difference between the astral-bodied creature and the non-astral-bodied creature. They have locomotion. I already mentioned the needs and wants and desires. That sense of kind of this kind of inner life, this inner map or representation of the world and how they want to interact with that world. And then finally, we'll go to the fourth body, which is unique to humans and is not contained by the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, or the mineral kingdom. And that's what we call an ontic organization, or the more plain word is the ego organization. Ego is a bit of a tricky word because it can have multiple meanings, which can take us off in wrong directions. Like we talk about someone having a big ego or something like that. Someone is egotistical, or that has a whole different meaning. That's not what we're talking about here. We like that term ontic because it kind of differentiates us away from that, and that's what the human being has, which the animal doesn't, the plant doesn't, the mineral doesn't. And if, again, this can be a meditation for you, if you think about, well, what can a human being do? What capacities do they have? What part of their consciousness is there that's not there for those three lower kingdoms? That starts to give you the answer of what that fourth body is. So as again, I just, that's a very brief outline. We can kind of talk about a lot of things about that and the implications of all that in future episodes. But for our point today, when we're talking about the timeline of shocks and traumas, this idea of, when we went through that, the what the plant kingdom has in terms of an etheric body, what the animal kingdom has in terms of an astral body, the human has all of the above. The whole idea of disease, which a shock or a trauma is, it gets lodged into the etheric body, the human's etheric body. So you can say the part of us that's that vegetative, functioning, plant-like nature. We all have like an inner palm tree or something inside of us. We have that plant function as part of our human physiology. When we get a shock or a trauma, that's the part that's being affected. When we talk about a cellular memory, it's like people talk about allergies. They talk about other cellular memory things that are going on. It's that plant part, that etheric part of our physiology, which is absorbing that cellular memory, that shock or trauma. But how is it that we even had a susceptibility for that shock or trauma in the first place? That comes through our astral body, that part of us which kind of has that animal kingdom function. That astral body, its wants and needs and desires and all of that, when that becomes corrupted in some sense, blocked or corrupted, or somehow impaired in its natural functions, that's where we become susceptible to such a shock or trauma actually forming a cellular memory for us. Because otherwise, if we didn't have that susceptibility in the first place, we could go through some shock in life, and we can kind of pick ourselves up, go through a little bit of a natural healing process, but it would not remain as a long-term shock or trauma in the sense that we need to treat in the timeline, right? We would just kind of shake it off, as it were, and kind of go on with our life. But because of that astral body that the humans share with the animal kingdom, and because of our possibility of having kind of a corrupted kind of desire function, or a corrupted kind of engagement with our world around us, in terms of our needs and wants, and how we fulfill our desires and all these things, if that couldn't become corrupted in the human being, then there would be no need for a protocol like timeline therapy. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that background, that because of this fourfold physiology in the human being, giving you the most basic explanation here, but that's what makes it possible for us to even retain the cellular memory of a shock, and this is what makes the need for therapeutic, like timeline therapy, kind of necessary for us in the first place.
Yeah, a perfect example is somebody who says, I was in love and that relationship ended so badly. I just can't free fall into another relationship.
Perfect example. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm
Exactly.
guarded, I'm walled off, I'm very watchful, I'm armored to the opportunity to be in love. I'm sure that clean way of free falling into a relationship with perfect trust and faith is not available to me anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, walled off is such a beautiful phrase, and yeah, it takes us back to what we said with Rudy and Patty's book, their English version of the Elminger book. That yeah, they introduce the emotional shock and trauma remedies, the NSOL variations, right? For exactly that. It's like, because yeah, that's not like getting a concussion, or like a car accident, whiplash, or all these basic physical shocks and traumas. Those are a pretty small set of the kinds of things that can that we can take in like that, those kinds of shocks. But yeah, when you get into that realm, it's like you have to understand this higher level of this corrupted astral function, as you beautifully illustrated. So given all of that, we have an etheric body which holds the cellular memory. We have the astral body which made the susceptibility possible in the first place. And now let's go the other direction. So now when we get into timeline therapy, what is happening when that shock or trauma is being released? Because as I said a couple of minutes ago, the any shock or trauma in this sense, in this context, is actually a disease, just like any other disease we talk about. We talk about the chronic miasms. Somebody has an inherited tuberculosis miasm that they've inherited from their family tree. That's an infectious disease which we've inherited from our family. Well, the same with a shock or trauma. It's another category, but it's still under that broad umbrella of disease, right? It's impinging into our etheric body. It kind of, the door was open through that astral body in one way or another. And now when we go the other way, so there's two phases of the whole curative and healative process. So you give somebody, like I said earlier, Dr. Elmaguer gave the curative remedy for that blockage to cure for the patient. And now we're going to go into some more anatomy and some more detail here. So we have the remedy, the medicine, the homeopathic medicine. It, at its activity, at its action, it really invokes the curative response. So through the law of similars, you give that certain medicine, it matches the disease, that's going on in the person, and in a relatively short period of time, that curative action unfolds itself. It's the disease is cured. The remedy, the homeopathic medicine has done its job. That's wonderful. That's great. And now the longer process happens, the healing reaction, where now the life force, the healing power of the person, it takes over. It's like this grand relay race. The medicine to the first leg of the race, it passes the baton over to the healing power, and now it pushes out all of the toxic residues, the disease residues that have been sitting in the person for all this time. So curing, healing, always in that order.
Yep.
The medicine does the curing, then the life force does the healing.
I have a perfect example when my son Jordan, who was the first member of our family to be treated with Heilkunst, he, as you may know, suffered a vaccine trauma from the MMR and stopped having eye contact and speech and passing stool regularly. So when we actually undid that iatrogenic trauma and gave the remedies for that insult, what happened was he started speaking and making eye contact. That was one aspect. But he also started vomiting and passing an enormous amount of stool because he had not gone properly, sometimes only once or twice every 2 weeks. And so what ended up happening was there was finally this grand purge. We finally unblocked his little life force, and everything just came out. I mean, it was vomiting, diarrhea, speaking, eye contact. It was an amazing event to witness the unblocking of his life force from this huge shock and trauma.
And you got to save the admission price for the ticket to seeing The Exorcist.
The extended version.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you got the 3D, full-bodied smell-o-vision version.
Yeah, we had to have the carpets cleaned 3 times that year alone, his first year of Heilkunst medicine, because holy wow, it was, yeah, just everything purged.
Well, I guess another beautiful, vivid living example of how, this is not a pure, simple mechanical process, but
No.
this is a very, going right to the dynamic aspect of the life power itself. And
Mhm.
all kinds of things are going to,
Yeah, we learned about the polarity of his little life force, like what was walled off and yeah, under wraps. And I mean, we completely lost him. We didn't even know who he was anymore. He was just this little robot lining up his cars for hours at a time, screaming through the night. And I mean, it was brutal. But when we actually finally unblocked, it was like, wow, it's like a Pinocchio story. We got to meet the real little boy.
mm-hmm. Yeah, look who was there inside of all of that. Look at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there we go. So I wanted to lay out all that basic, the four bodies, and then the two aspects of the curative and the healative process. So now we have some idea of the anatomy, as we'll call it, of what's going on. But let's also just to remember, and I think we've kind of discussed this, from one angle or another before, but this idea of the healing reaction, and thank you for your vivid example again, Allison, but this idea of the healing reaction, it's not going to, like, back to our crystal ball and what we can predict over the next 12 months. It's like, I don't know why people kind of think we can predict those, because I mean, look at the weather prediction. They can't even predict 3 days into the future. How long
It
have we
rained today and it wasn't supposed to rain.
exactly how long have we had meteorological science and even give 72 hours? So yeah, where how are we supposed to give 12 months? Anyway, that's my little rant on all of that. But yeah, the real point I want to make here is that this whole idea of the healing reaction, and all the glorious and not so glorious discharges that can come out and everything, they the form is known. We know that discharge is the essential part of healing, better out than in, as we say. But what we usually can very little predict at all is exactly what is going to be that discharge. And specifically, what I mean here is if we have a physical event we're treating on someone's timeline, that may come out in the form of a mental or emotional discharge. When we're poised on the edge of our seat, waiting for that physical discharge, but it's not nowhere to be found. So patients often will miss that. We see them at that 28-day follow up, and you say, okay, how was your month? You took the remedy. What happened? And, this and that, and just tell me everything that's going on. And then, oh no, I took the remedies, but I don't think anything happened, and everything's the same as it was last month. But as this is one of the big reasons, is they don't understand or expect the possibility of a crossover, or vice versa. We can give them something for an emotional shock, let's say a big grief, or some kind of betrayal event, or some such thing, and their event may be purely physical. They may have a migraine, or they may have a stuffed up nose or something. And then same thing, they'll come in because they're expecting an emotional reaction to the remedy, because it's an emotional event. And they'll same thing, they'll say, no, nothing happened this month. I don't know if the remedies are working. It's like the old joke, is this thing on? Is this microphone working? It's like, is this remedy working? No, but this is the point here. It's like, yeah, there can be that crossover, that good old mind body connection. It's like, yeah, we don't know where that discharge is best going to come through. Now we can make reasonable guesses, but again, like, we'll be lucky to get the 72 hours that the meteorologist gets.
Yeah. I had a patient years ago with MS, and I actually wrote an article about it. I'll ask you to put it in the show notes below. But it was an amazing thing. People with MS or CP or fibromyalgia, like I suffered before I came to this system of medicine, were walled off because of the trauma in our childhood. And emotionally, we're not really able to connect to our physical bodies anymore. And so this woman had said to me, it was the first follow up, the first 28-day cycle she'd gone through. And she said, nothing's changed. And she was incensed. Like, you could tell by the way she was talking, she was inferring that she wanted her money back. And so it was kind of interesting. And at the very end, it was, like you say, an emotional event that we were clearing. And she said, oh, my hand in my lap, I actually I'm moving it. I'm moving it right now. And I said to her, oh, wow, that's interesting. How long has it been since you've moved your hand? And she said, oh, I think about 2.5 decades. Like, oh my God. You go from no change to I'm moving my hand for the first time in 2.5 decades. Like, and that's just the thing about that particular disease matrix. It does not correlate physical and emotional transformation as being one or the same. So that's my example and illustration of that. I was still took me kind of days to figure out what I had heard.
Right. Yeah, no, people are funny. They get so locked into certain ways of perceiving themselves and their health and all the rest that, yeah, they They can have the most amazing thing, a hand moving after 2.5 decades, and they can't see it.
Yeah, can't see
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, then you like putting in a lot of effort to point it out to them. Well, it's like, does that not, does not hit your radar in any way that something big just happened there? Or, yeah,
Yeah.
people are so funny. And actually, Hahnemann does speak to this in his way. He talks about, the nature of, long-term chronic illness is people just kind of become numb to even
Mhm.
perceiving that in themselves. So when it comes to that starting to reverse, through the remediation process, they've kind of almost become, quite numb to even being able to see improvements. Like it can't be part of their concept of their health anymore.
Yeah. This was also true for me. I know when I first started, Patty kept saying to me, Jordan's only going to go to get a certain distance if you don't undergo Halkins treatment. I was, oh, for God's sake, all right. So finally, after being, bullied for what felt like 3 or 4 months, I actually took my first remedy. I was pissed. Oh my God, I was pissed. So just anger welled up in, it was like Niagara Falls version of rage and anger. I didn't even know where to put it all. It just kept cascading. And oh my God, I was incensed, enraged in ways it was indescribable. And of course, after all of this content was released, I actually felt joy.
Right.
I hadn't felt joy in 30 years. And I was so, I would have missed that opportunity in my life completely if I had not taken that first dose of Staphysagria.
Hmm. Yeah, and that joy that you allude to, yeah, that's definitely the the goal of it all, right? The goal isn't to put someone through a crazy healing reaction, and like we're at some kind of circus freak show or something. See what we can, what entertainment we can get for a nickel or whatever. But no, it's getting to that actual state of health at the bottom of all of it is, where we're headed.
Yeah, thank God
So
we have the flower incense now to,
no.
yeah, to just cushion that and get the mother to come in and hold lovingly our life force as we go through this process, because we didn't have that back when I was going through this.
No. Now, I have an example as well. We're talking about this crossover, between the healing reaction discharge. Will it be more mental, emotional? Will it be a physical discharge? This is a little bit of an interesting case. Um, this was we were treating on the timeline a woman who had a broken arm, and she was at home when she broke her arm. She slipped down the last couple of steps in her house, something to that effect, and so and this was early for me in my practice. We gave the remedy for broken bone, but what we didn't know until she came back 28 days later was that her reaction has nothing to do with her physical arm or a warm sensation in her bone or anything like that, but it was actually this whole grief response. And I said, well, that's weird. Like what does that have to do with a broken arm? But as it happens, she never told us, at the beginning, that the broken arm slipping down her stairs happened just moments after she'd gotten the news of a beloved uncle who had passed away. So it was kind of a grief event with just a little bit of a broken arm thrown in for extra flavor or whatever. But by us just treating that, we missed that. So we actually needed to give her a further timeline event around the grief we didn't even know was there. But anyways, my point of there's other lessons we can gain from all of that. My point here being that, yeah, if you don't have all the background, or other factors are missing, you don't know if you're going to see that healing reaction discharge through the mental emotional channels or the physical, or a bit of both. You may not know what you're dealing with there.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember Jordan broke his collarbone, and when we were treating that, he brought up a huge amount of resentment. And of course, he was resentful and angry at me because he felt it was my fault that he had fallen out of bed. He is probably right in that estimation. But you're right, the physical manifestation of a clearing of a disease matrix generally does not operate in isolation on the physical level.
Yeah. So I want to Actually, I want to bring up a topic. We did spend time on this book in our first episode. This was on the Thorwald Deathlison book, The Healing Power of Illness. I just want to recap that for a moment, but take this into a new place now. And if you recall, in episode one, we were talking about this idea of what is the meaning of symptoms and the meaning of illness, and the way we talked about it in part at the time was kind of being able to develop this symptom literacy, right? We have word literacy. We know how to read the words on a piece of paper. We know how to speak words and all this kind of thing. But I'm talking about the literacy of not just taking symptoms as a mechanical thing, but as this deeper life content. Like you were saying, we're not in this realm of pure mechanics, but we're in this deep living dynamis of the human being, which has multi layers of meaning. And to get at them, we need this multi layer of literacy. So, anyways, I'm just drawing back on the episode one when we're talking about the meaning of symptoms, and particularly something we only gave a brief bit about, but we'll talk a little bit more about here, is that author, Deathlefson, he considers physical shocks and traumas like a car accident or other things, sports accidents, other things of the nature. He interprets the same way as I just said about symptoms, meaning you don't just take a sore throat as bacteria that got into that person's throat, the mechanical explanation, but given whatever the details of that case are, you may come to an interpretation that, oh, this person has some really important thing they have to say, but whatever their life circumstances, they feel they're not able to speak up, right? So it gets kind of stuck in their throat. So anyways, just to say that there are already now two layers of meaning, and we can discover more. But just to say all of that is the symptom mode of interpretation in Deathlefson. You find those deeper levels of meaning. He does the same thing for accidents and physical traumas, as I'm saying. So in our Heilprin's context and in this timeline context, this gets into the concept of what we call the ambient of the patient.
Mm.
And what that, now, ambient is not a very commonly used word. I mean, we talk about, when we use the word ambit, that sort of is a bit of a synonym at one level. What's kind of going on around somebody, what's in my kind of broader environment or whatever. But in our specific context, we have this not just a concept, but clinical experience and observations of how true this is. That the life function of a person does not end at their skin, right? It's not, we're not all sitting here just contained with whatever's inside of our skin. But what's that expression, between our hat and our boots or something? We're more than that. And we know this. Our life energy extends out around us, and that's what we mean by the ambient. So the environment, you can say, is kind of the abstraction. It's everything around us. I can point. Oh yeah, there's a lamp, and there's a pen on my desk, and these are all the things in my environment, broadly speaking. But the ambient is that part which is distinctly and specifically connected to my life energy, right? So okay, so we're getting somewhere with that. So we have, we our life energy expresses through certain things in and around our environment. But this is the point I'm getting to, is when it comes to an accident, a so-called accident. Deathlefson agrees with this. There are no accidents in the sense of something that happens randomly, outside of our living function, but it's always some form of expression, just like a symptom is, like the sore throat, of something that is not able to express through the proper channels in our normal day-to-day functioning. So as I say, the same way a sore throat can come on for reasons like that, an accident can be kind of drawn in towards us because of something in our life function that needs prompting in one way or another. So let's get into some of the more detailed, concrete examples of this. Deathlefson, in his book, I've just pulled out some of his quotes, but just to give some more flavor here, he talks about, I'll just read some of his phrases, and we'll just kind of get the feeling of it all. He says, an accident is a caricature of one's problems, and just as painful and penetrating as any other character. And I'll just repeat the first part of that phrase. An accident is a caricature of one's problems. I found that such a such a deep kind of poetic phrase, but it's deep scientific meaning as well. He says, it is sufficient to listen in carefully to how people describe what happened. The ambiguity of our language gives the whole game away. So this is for us, a big key when it comes to the timeline treatment, and when we're asking questions of the patient and everything. They may have given us this kind of written timeline, but of course we talk it through with them more interview style. And yeah, this has become such a cornerstone for our diagnosis, is to and actually I'll read one more phrase from Deathlefson here. He says, we often ask patients to keep repeating one particular sentence from their description until something rings a bell for them. So this, as I say, is so key for us to excuse me, really get into this deeper meaning, this deeper diagnostic level of what is the real content of their illness that really kind of drew that kind of accident into their ambient, right? And as I say, their language gives it away. We call it logos language. People speak with certain words and phrases, and there's no accident to we just go through our everyday conversations and we talk blah 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 blah. But if you really listen to someone, especially in this diagnostic kind of framework, you notice the way they describe an accident, the way they describe something that happened to them. They use just a particular word, a particular phrase, which is so meaningful. And this is what Deathlefson is saying is, well, just get them to repeat that a few times until they start to get this. Like, let me give you some examples here, where if somebody's had some kind of car accident, traffic fender bender, whatever, any number of common phrases may come up, but which one did they pick? Which one has that hidden meaning that's they're kind of bringing out hidden in plain sight. If someone says, "Oh, I lost my way, I got into a tailspin, I lost my grip, I lost control, I couldn't stop," like all of these seemingly innocent little phrases. And if you really tuned into listening to how your patient is talking and using one phrase versus another, and kind of bring their attention back to that, you can really start to get to this diagnostic level of what Deathlefson is really hinting at strongly for us here. Is like, yeah, there's a real nugget of gold contained as far as the diagnostic process is concerned, right? It's like language is not, as I say, not random or haphazard, but it contains this living dynamic energy, which is not this pure mechanical aspect.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner said that the patient will actually tell you which organ is affected by the way they use the language.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Mm. The other, one more from the traffic accidents. I find this one so vivid. They might say, "Oh yeah, the other driver kept edging his way into my lane." Like like in other words, he was where he was. So you can translate that to someone's life. It's like, okay, well, is there somebody kind of bullying you somewhere in your life, or kind of trying to push you out of the way, or not kind of respecting your boundaries, or whatever the case is. It will speak back to some living content in their life. I say they just think, oh yeah, I'm just mechanically describing the accident that happened, but they lay down all these clues of what is the inner dynamics of what's actually going on in their life to precipitate the way that accident formed and the details that it did.
Yeah. And that violation will be revealed. And it isn't always this lifetime. It may be a series of events that are going on this lifetime, but it can harken back. I've had, women that I've served more often than men who have said, Ali, I see myself dressed in different clothing. I see myself on a ship. I'm tied to the mast. And this violation occurred not just this lifetime, but other lifetimes in the past too. Oftentimes, if it's an issue with regards, especially to a parent, they'll cover their mouth because they're so couched in not displaying what that is, and they don't want to speak to it. They'll actually bring up a gesture that lets you know that they've done a really good job of keeping that under wraps for decades, typically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And those gestures actually are just another version of
Mhm.
the hidden meaning that innocent words and phrases seem to give us, right?
Right.
Mhm. The other, actually, yeah, so we had the traffic accidents. I'll just tie up this little part here. When we not only have I mean, Deathlefson was very clear. You can't just give a recipe book for this. You have to do a real living dynamic interpretation in a given case, right? You can't just say, oh, well, this recipe book says, a car accident means, whatever. Like, you have to find the actual meaning in that actual case. He's just giving some general prompts and suggestions here. But yeah, when it comes to other accidents, let's say someone has burnt their tongue. It's like, well, we have, what is a burn?
Mm.
Of course, we have the tongue and speaking and talking and expressing ourselves. But burning in general, he gives the associations, that of danger, like things that are burning are dangerous. Or we also have, the linguistic expression. We have burning issues that are at
Mm.
stake. This is a burning issue in my life, or something like that. He also, alludes to the strong association with love and sexuality. I have a burning desire, all of those kinds of things. But yeah, so just by listening to what words does someone use and the way they use it to describe something in their timeline gives you this whole other dimension of diagnostic clues to, yeah, what's the actual living disease content that we have to go after here.
Yeah, it's the most interesting part of being a Hal counselor, I think. And
Exactly.
if you think about the other system, the traditional or conventional model, you go and you get a drug slapped on you for, cortisone, the rash disappears. What an opportunity that's been lost. That the whole story and meaning about how to prevent or to understand so that you can prevent that disease matrix from engendering again in the future after you've cured it. What a lost opportunity. It seems so sad and pathetic when you really think about
I know. Hmm.
it.
Well, you know what? And also thinking of this idea of multiple levels of meaning, if somebody is studying literature, right, or film or any art like that, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of studying is the joy of discovering these multiple levels of meaning, in a classic novel or something like that. Well, same thing, you can take that same joy to this diagnostic process and realize that, yeah, you if you just read, the classic novel or whatever, but only just see the surface level of the mechanics of the plot. Oh yeah, this character started here and then they went over here. Well, you ruin a piece of literature by just interpreting it mechanically like that.
Yeah,
Same
well
thing with
said.
diagnosis. Yeah, you ruin it if you can't be literate at all these levels of meaning and truly help the patient, kind of resolve what's going on at their multi-dimensional levels of being.
Yeah, well said. It's interesting because I've had a patient who suffered migraines, and we discovered that it was congestion in her, not just in her liver, but in her pancreas. And I, wanted to know, and she was using language around, congestion and having to hold her head and thinking about, well, what's the opposite of that, which is the full release and the being able to actually live the sweetness of her life,
Mhm.
the full embodied sweetness of her life. And that included sexual discharge. And she wasn't, and nobody would normally figure that out, that her sexual repression and not being able to be intimate with her husband regularly, most people would be like, okay, well, let's just give, the drugs for the migraine. You shut down the whole opportunity to really study the anatomy of her suffering and discern the roots to be able to promote true remediation, not just throwing a remedy or a drug at it. There was a whole other aspect that needed to be unpacked.
And thank you for that example, Allison. I mean, it's to the point of what we're talking about, but it's also the perfect transition to the next topic we have lined up today, and that
Woohoo!
is, speaking of, the whole sexual function and the natural discharge versus, or not, depending on, the whatever is going on for the person's life and all the rest of it. We get into the whole area of orgonomy or orgone medicine, Dr. Reich's work. And this is, again, this could be something, that covers many, many, many podcast episodes. But yeah, we just want to give a little snippet here, really, to illuminate what we're talking about with the timeline. So, as I say, keeping it very brief here, but this whole idea of this whole, medical orgonomy, the science of orgonomy, gets to this example you just gave, Allison. Is there, at multiple levels in the human being, there are uh, necessary and natural processes of, taking in and building up of energy, and then a proper discharge and a releasing of that energy.
Hmm.
Say that in the most generic way, but just to say, yeah, our whole physiology is built on that. And when we get into this topic of the timeline, we've talked about the ambient and what drew an accident, to happen to you at that time, that given time, or whatever. Well, layering on this aspect as well, to understand if somebody, at one level or another, is not having that complete cycle, of the taking in of energy, its build up, its discharge, and its release. If that's not happening, well, that could create in that person's ambient an accident to kind of, create, you can say, an external or an artificial trigger to release energy that should have been released, like in the natural way. But instead, let's say it has to happen in a car accident, or some other domestic accident or whatever. But as I say, this is kind of the ergonomic level where that ambient, in a sense, is going to answer to the human organism. And if it's not fulfilling, what it needs to be doing, well, something is going to come along to try to help. Now, as I say, it's not pleasant to us. It's like we don't like getting in a car accident or anything else of the course. But as they say in show business, the show must go on. Well, our physiology must go on, and that discharge process must be completed. If not in the natural mode, then some other helping um, event will happen to to do that for you, or to assist that. Um,
Going back to that patient in the beginning who was taken out of the car accident on a board, you're right. That whole childhood trauma of all the bombings was just, so built up inside of her that something needed to happen to trip the lights fantastic,
yes.
to make a cascade of events happen so that she could actually deal with the root cause of her childhood traumas.
Hmm. Hmm. That's it. And with thinking back to something we said a few minutes ago, um, with oh yeah, when we were talking about the car accidents and the language that people use, well, one of the phrases, someone could use could be something like, "Oh, I was blindsided," right?
Mm.
So I didn't see them coming, or it was dark, or all these kinds of things. But bringing this into the medical orgone context, very, very briefly, again, this could be many episodes of different topics here. We're not going to pack that all in here, because yeah, we'd never stop talking. We'd just be on this episode for the rest of our life, just talking. For practical reasons, we can't do that. But yeah, so just this idea in the orgone medicine, that we have these different segments, right? Reich identified 7 segments. The ocular, the vision in the eyes, the oral, or the whole mouth, and taking in food, giving out words, these kinds of things. Anyways, he went through all the 7, but that ocular segment, when we overlay this now back onto this idea of the car accident, and I got blindsided, or I didn't see him coming, or
Mhm.
all these things. Well, yeah, this opens our diagnostic antenna into, okay, well, what is it about the ocular blockage in that person which needs proper remediation, properly
Mhm.
opened up. So anyway, that's one little hint of an area. We can blow right up into many examples here, but just to say, yeah, this gives us a whole other access into the timeline, and doing really a full remediation, rather
Mhm.
than the mechanical one we warned about at the beginning.
Yeah, well said.
Hmm. Hmm. The other, and also to overlay, from this orgone kind of overlay onto the traffic accidents, if someone, once or several times, keeps getting rear-ended, in traffic situations or whatever. Well, again, in the orgone context, we can talk about not the ocular block in that person, but what Reich would have identified as the anal blockage.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, life as a whole, the energy around them kind of kind of converges on them, in the form, in this case, the form of a rear-ending car accident, to kind of try to penetrate them from behind. Again, I'm using PG language here, but this kind of becomes part of the ambient of a person. Is, and again, it could be metaphorical, right? People who, um, I got, blankety blank. I'm not going to use the language, but it's kind of like, someone who didn't treat somebody fairly or nicely. Well, that's another metaphorical form of what I just said about kind of getting rear-ended or hit from
Yeah.
behind. Right?
Or drop the soap.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's not, as I said, one way or the other. You start to become awake to all these different levels of true diagnostic meaning. And again, I don't. People could make up all kinds of crazy interpretations, but once you get into the real living energy of a case, you start to touch on the reality of what's going on. And
Mhm.
yet, it's not just airy fairy. You just made up some crazy interpretation, but no, it actually fits the actual energy of that whole person's life and
Yeah.
case.
Well said.
Mhm.
And I'm amazed, week after week, month after month, year after year, that we practice just how, the individual really wants to reveal the deeper causation
Yeah.
of their case. It's like you even have to meditate on how and why is that the individual truly wants to reveal the deeper essence of their suffering.
Hmm.
And that's the thing. It's so dynamic, it's so karmic, it's so um, illuminating, and so fascinating and interesting. And based on that alone, we've had many patients who have turned into Heil counselors because of that level of fascination about, wow, you're like unpacking the whole of human physiology and their psyche through this process of remediation on such a level that's, and as one patient said to me from the Middle East, he said, Ali, this is the most eloquent
Mm.
system of medicine I could ever, elegant, not eloquent, elegant system of medicine I've ever been exposed to.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Hmm. Well, it's, yeah, finally where medical science has actually met and matched the dynamic complexity of life.
Yes.
Not
Hmm.
just pure mechanical. And something you said a moment ago too is like, well, how do people know, or why do they express? Well, that's in that bigger sense. That's part of the whole definition of life and health. Is we express. I mean, we express physically. That's our idea of the healing reaction, and the vomiting might be a discharge, and all that kind of expression. But yeah, at these deeper and higher levels, we are here to express the fullness of who we are. And actually, we're going to speak a little more on that point in a couple of minutes. There's another piece of content we're coming to. But in between, before that, we have kind of one more in between topic. And that is, this is something actually you and I both did many years ago. It was the what's called family constellation work by Bert
Hmm.
Hellinger. And it's a beautiful, beautiful modality. And Alison, do you want to kind of set a scene, like if we're in a room with people doing family constellation work, what's happening? What do you see people doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, we all were gathered and invited to sit in a circle. And then a volunteer was chosen. Usually it was somebody that was very emotionally charged and really ready to kind of explore this aspect of their family dynamics that was really kind of living in them in a way that the trauma was kind of sitting there on the surface. And so the leader of the group would actually give the individual a number of colored tiles, and they would lay them down on the ground, and they would actually represent each member of the family that seemed pertinent to this trauma that was alive in them. Then they would invite people from the audience to step on one of the mats to help them recreate the circumstances set up for healing. And I thought this was a bit woo-woo in the beginning. Like I come from the background of being a financial advisor, and so sometimes it takes me a while to unload my mechanistic, materialistic view of the world in favor of a group of people standing on mats and suddenly embodying that member of that individual's family, um, and not knowing who it was that they represented until I got called up 1 month to be a member on the mat. And I felt that ripple go down my spine. And suddenly I was hunched over and I was speaking with a different voice. It was the most eerie, crazy, and I was saying things that I would have never said in a context even remotely like that. And I realized afterwards, I was told that I was his grandmother
Mm.
and had taken on and embodied her whole physiology. And when we acted out, I didn't know why I was prompted to say certain things, but he broke down and started sobbing. And my inclination was to get off the mat and go to comfort him. But, the leader said, no, 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 you stay where you are. And it was the weirdest sensation. It was like channeling, if that's, a thing. I didn't know at the time that that was even a possibility. But what a dynamic thing. And the idea about Bert Hellinger's book, because that Christmas I went home, maybe you remember, I took out of the library a stack of 15 books and I read almost all of them through that whole holiday because I was just absolutely off the charts fascinated by what had happened through that process. And that's the thing, is that especially if somebody has married somebody and made them like more important than the child that
Mhm.
they had with a previous partner, you jump the queue and you mess the family constellation
Mhm.
up.
Yeah.
And there's trauma as a result of this dynamic being broken, really. The child always comes first
Yes.
and must come first before the second marriage partner.
Hmm.
Right.
And this, yeah, thank you so much. So, yeah, we can, I think, all feel, kind of participating in this example that Alison is laying out. Back to our bigger concept here. Okay, we're treating the timeline, and what are all the different levels of diagnostic meaning and literacy that we need to be able to see and to read. Is, yeah, let's say it's a simple timeline event you're treating for somebody, a broken arm, a whatever, a car, a fender bender, this, that, or the other thing. But yeah, without appreciating, perhaps you're kind of, as you go to treat that, maybe what you need to be tapping into is this, for example, using Bert Hellinger's modality to
Mhm.
help them more on the healative process of that, to release what was really bearing on them, which gave rise to that given, shock or trauma or accident, whatever it was. Like, yeah, there's more. What's that old expression? It's more than meets the eye.
No.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to bring up, the Hellinger work. I mean, there's other applications of it and other discussion points, but yeah, definitely illuminates our timeline. And where I want to go is what I sort of alluded to a couple of minutes ago, is what I'm calling, and again, this is another area like medical ergonomy, like anthroposophy, like all the different things. It's like, we need kind of, we come here and we talk for an episode's worth of content, and we have a nice conversation, but really, every episode, if it was expanded out fully, could be thousands of hours long. But obviously that's not practical to record that, it's not practical to listen to that, so we break it up into little topics. So anyways, my way of saying that this last topic, what I'm calling the American New Thought movement itself, is a vast, vast, vast area. I'm just going to zero in on one aspect of this under our umbrella today of the timeline therapeutics. Is one of the core principles of the American New Thought movement has to do with really activating and manifesting the fullness of somebody's life. Now, it's often applied in a very kind of diminished way. It's like, oh, I'm going to just imagine, I'm going to get, a new sports car, or more money in my bank, or this or that. Nothing wrong with those things, but it's kind of not really getting to the core of what the American New Thought movement is about, which is really fully activating. This is something we alluded to a couple of minutes ago, the full expression of what a person is. What's really, it's like the seed of a plant. Properly taken care of, fully blossoms into the full form of that plant. The acorn fully blossoming into a full oak tree, whatever the seed is, whatever the example is. And this idea of the American New Thought movement gets at that, in its real essence is, yeah, you don't just want to be willy-nilly, like you blow out your birthday candles and make a wish or whatever, but you want to really get into the depth of, yeah, what is the seed of you really meant to grow into, right, in its fullness. So anyways, all that to say is, when we're getting into the timeline, that similar to what we said about the family constellations, perhaps a shock, a trauma, an accident came into somebody's ambient, disturbed the flow of their life, and this thing happened as kind of a wake-up call at some level, because they weren't in that pure objective desire of who they are. They were more on that outer ego function, right? They were in the function of chasing fame and fortune and their name up in lights, and trying to keep up with the Joneses, and all these kind of ego drives that people can get into. Not just can, we often get caught up in that web of things. But yeah, this is really the message, as far as the timeline is concerned, from the American New Thought movement, is, yeah, take the messages from your shocks, traumas, and accidents, give them the right homeopathic remedies, all the normal things that we would do there, but go even deeper into that question, that meditation of what have you, where have you been kind of off the rails as far as that true desire function, that true program for yourself, and get back on track with what you are actually meant to bring into the world. Right. So anyway, that's my very kind of condensed message about the American New Thought movement. But yeah, I'm sure it will rear its head again in our future episodes when we're coming from other topics, other subject matters. But I do think that's a good wrap up to the whole stream of topics we've gone through today.
Yeah. So learning that I wasn't meant to be a financial advisor for the federal government.
Exactly. Yeah. No, you were an acorn meant to be an oak tree, not a weed meant to populate the garden of Excel spreadsheets. Yeah.
I couldn't even look at an Excel spreadsheet these
I
days.
know.
I wouldn't even know what to do with one.
Hmm. Yeah. No, you really sold yourself short. You're in the wrong cell structure there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
So yeah, so that, as I say, I just we wanted to put all this together and kind of give you this basic idea. The timeline and its treatment is not a mechanical exercise. I mean, there's a basic mechanics to it, but if you stop there, boy, are you're really missing the much bigger picture of what's really going on in the dynamic human being.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah, do you have any, with everything we've talked about, Alison, any kind of final kind of case examples or kind of associations, of the different things we've talked about? Or...
no, I think we're good to go, actually. I think we fleshed it out well, and I thank you so much for the opportunity to co-host with you today, and be putting all the show notes together and examples and actual quotes from Deflison. It's been awesome hanging out with you, as it always is.
Likewise, yeah, this is one of our new favorite ways to hang out together now. And for our listener, anyone who's kind of interested in these topics and kind of has some ideas sparked by what we've talked about today, always remember that the episode, of course, comes to an end. As I said a minute ago, we can't go on for tens of thousands of hours in an episode. Although with today's computers, we have enough storage space, we just don't have enough talking bandwidth to do that in our human context. But yeah, as I say, the episode ends, but the discussion continues on, and anyone can join us. We have a special kind of ongoing space for any of our listeners called our Inner Circle. You can go to our website, thisheilkunstlife.com, and up in the corner you'll see Join Our Inner Circle, and you can actually kind of be one-on-one with us and with other listeners, and could keep this conversation going. So So yeah, we hope to see you in our inner circle. And otherwise, we will see everyone in the next episode. And thank you again, Allison. Thank you for listening. Thank you, for whatever questions you're going to put forward to us in the in-between episodes in our inner circle. And we will see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to all our listeners.